Our breaking news looks like guilty on all counts. We mentioned we just had a verdict in this case we've been following, and that comes from inside this Virginia courtroom. Brendan Banfield, 40-year-old former IRS agent, will now go to prison for murdering his wife and a stranger. He plotted the killings with his au pair, a 25-year-old woman.
On the surface, everything looked perfect. Stable career, loving family, the kind of life people admire from the outside. But behind closed doors, something far darker was unfolding. A web of lies, secret identities, messages that should have never been sent. And then, one night, it all collapsed. When police arrived, they found a scene that didn't match the story they were told. The details were wrong, the timeline fractured, and the more investigators dug, the more they realized this wasn't what it seemed. What happens when the person you trust most becomes the person you should fear? When intelligence is used not to build, but to destroy? When love turns into control, and control turns into something unthinkable? This is the story of a man who hid behind respectability, a woman who didn't see it coming, and the digital shadows that exposed the truth. You're watching The Exposed Crime. We tell the stories that need to be told. Domestic violence, toxic relationships, and the lives lost behind closed doors. No sugarcoating, no excuses, just the truth. If you're new here, subscribe and join us as we shed light on stories the world needs to hear. He was the kind of man people trusted. Sharp, professional. The type who could walk into a room and command it without raising his voice. His colleagues respected him. His neighbors waved. To the outside world, he had it all. A career built on logic. A home that looked like something out of a catalog. A family that seemed content. But respect is a fragile thing. And sometimes it's a shield. He worked in a field that required precision, attention to detail, an ability to read people, and to anticipate their next move. Skills that made him good at his job. Skills that, in the wrong hands, could be used for something else entirely. Christine met him when her life felt uncertain. He seemed stable, confident, the kind of man who had answers when she had questions. They married quickly. She thought she'd found safety. But safety isn't the same as honesty. From the outside, their home was immaculate. Inside, the silence was louder than any argument. He controlled the finances, controlled the schedule, controlled the narrative. Christine learned not to push, learned to keep things smooth. Then the au pair arrived. She was young, new to the country, dependent on them for work, for housing, for her sense of security. She didn't know the language well, didn't know the system, and he noticed. At first it was small, extra attention, private conversations, moments that felt just slightly too long. Christine noticed, but didn't say anything. What would she say? He was helping. He was being kind. But kindness can be a trap. Neighbors would later say they never saw anything unusual. A quiet household. No shouting. No drama. Just stillness. One friend would mention years later that something always felt controlled. Not warm, not spontaneous, just managed. And control, when taken too far, stops being care. It becomes dominance. It becomes isolation. It becomes the kind of thing that grows in the dark, unnoticed, until it's too late to stop. He built a life that looked perfect. But perfection, in the wrong hands, isn't peace. It's a prison with a polished exterior. And inside that prison, cracks were already forming. Something shifted when she moved in. The au pair wasn't just help around the house. She became part of the daily rhythm. Dinners, conversations, late-night chats when Christine had gone to bed. He said it was mentorship, said she needed guidance, said it was nothing. Christine wanted to believe him. But the phone calls started. Private, whispered, deleted. She'd walk into a room, and he'd put his phone down too quickly. She'd ask who he was talking to, and he'd say, "Work." Always work. But work didn't explain the smile, didn't explain the late nights, didn't explain why his mood changed whenever the au pair was nearby. The emotional distance between Christine and her husband grew wider. Conversations became transactional. Touch became rare. She felt like a roommate in her own marriage. And the au pair, she was caught in something she didn't fully understand. He told her she was special, told her she was misunderstood, told her things he'd never said to Christine. He made her feel seen in a way that felt intoxicating and dangerous. Friends started to notice. One coworker mentioned he seemed distracted. Another said he'd started making excuses to leave early. A neighbor remembered seeing him and the au pair in the driveway one evening, standing too close, talking in low voices. No one said anything. Because what do you say when you don't have proof, when it's just a feeling? But feelings have weight, and this one was suffocating. Christine confronted him once, just once. She asked if there was something going on. He looked at her like she was paranoid, like she was the problem. "You're imagining things," he said. So she stopped asking. The au pair, meanwhile, began pulling away. She felt the tension, felt the weight of something she couldn't name. She started talking about leaving, about going back home. He didn't like that. Control requires proximity, and he was losing his grip. Messages became more frequent, more urgent. He created alternate accounts, profiles with different names, different photos. He wanted access without accountability, wanted influence without evidence. And slowly, carefully, he began to plan. Not in the way most people plan, not with clear intention or visible malice, but in the way someone plans when they believe they're smarter than everyone else, when they believe they won't get caught. The internet became his second life. While Christine slept, he was online. While she cooked dinner, he was messaging. While she tried to hold their marriage together, he was building something else entirely, a version of himself that existed only in pixels and lies. Fake profiles, anonymous accounts, different names, different faces, different stories. He wasn't just hiding, he was performing. Investigators would later find dozens of messages, deleted, but not gone. Timestamps that painted a picture of obsession, late-night conversations, promises, threats disguised as concern. "You don't understand what you mean to me. Don't tell anyone about this. I can't let you leave." The au pair didn't know how to respond. She was flattered, then confused, then scared. She tried to create distance. He closed it. She tried to be polite. He interpreted it as encouragement. She tried to leave. He made it impossible. He knew her schedule, knew her passwords, knew who she talked to and when. He'd installed tracking apps on her phone under the guise of keeping her safe. He monitored her location, her calls, her messages. It wasn't love. It was surveillance. And surveillance, when it comes from someone you trust, feels like suffocation. Behavioral experts would later describe his actions as grooming under coercion. He didn't use force, not yet. He used dependency, manipulation, emotional leverage. He made her feel like she owed him, like leaving would be betrayal, like speaking up would destroy everything. And for a while, it worked. But control like that doesn't last. It builds pressure. And pressure, eventually, breaks. One night, Christine found a deleted message on his laptop. Just one. It was enough. She didn't scream, didn't cry, just stared at the screen and realized she'd been living with a stranger. She confronted him again. This time, he didn't deny it. He got angry. "You don't understand," he said. "You never understood." That was the first time she felt afraid. Not sad, not heartbroken. Afraid. Because anger, when it comes from someone who's been hiding this much, isn't just emotion. It's a warning. And warnings, when ignored, turn into tragedy. The night everything fell apart started quietly. Too quietly. The 911 call came in at 11:47 p.m. His voice was shaking, breathless, panicked. Something's happened. She's not breathing. I don't know what to do. Dispatch walked him through CPR, told him to stay calm, told him help was on the way. When paramedics arrived, they found Christine on the floor, unresponsive, no pulse. He was standing nearby, hands trembling, face pale. "I don't know what happened," he kept saying, "and I just found her like this." But the scene told a different story. Her position didn't match a fall. The lighting was wrong. The timeline didn't add up. And when police started asking questions, his answers kept shifting. "I was downstairs. I was in the other room. I heard a noise. I didn't hear anything." Investigators noticed bruising that didn't fit the story, found evidence of a struggle, overturned furniture, scratches, things that suggested violence, not accident. And then they checked his phone, location data, app activity, messages sent and deleted minutes before the call. His phone had been active right up until the moment he dialed 911. He'd been online, searching, erasing, not panicking, planning. Forensic teams swept the home, found traces of sedatives, and found evidence of premeditation. Searches for how long until unconsciousness, signs of overdose. What happens if you don't call for help right away? The au pair was questioned. She broke down. She told them about the messages, the control, the fear. The night he told her, "If you leave, I'll make sure you regret it." She told them Christine had been trying to help her, had offered to pay for her flight home, had told her, "You don't owe him anything." And that, investigators believed, was the breaking point. Because Christine wasn't just a wife anymore. She was a threat, a witness, someone who knew too much, and in his mind, someone who had to be silenced. The medical examiner's report was clear. Asphyxiation. Deliberate. Sustained. Not an accident. Not a tragedy. Murder. And the man who called 911, voice shaking, hands trembling. He wasn't grieving. He was performing. One last time. The courtroom was silent when the verdict was read. Guilty. First-degree murder. He didn't react. Just stared straight ahead, jaw tight, the same controlled expression he'd worn through the entire trial. But the evidence had spoken louder than any performance. Forensic testimony. Digital records. Witness statements. The au pair's tearful account of months of manipulation and fear. Christine's friends describing the woman she used to be, before the isolation, before the silence, before the fear. The prosecution painted a picture of a man who believed he was untouchable, who used his intelligence not to help, but to harm, who saw people not as equals, but as variables he could control. And when control failed, he eliminated the problem. While psychologists testified about patterns of coercive control, about how abusers don't always use fists, they use words, isolation, dependence, how they strip away identity until the victim doesn't know who they are anymore. Christine's family sat in the front row. Her mother read a victim impact statement. "She trusted him," she said, voice breaking, "and he killed her for it." The defense tried to argue emotion, impulse, a moment of panic, but the searches, the deleted messages, the fake profiles, the timeline. None of it was impulsive. It was calculated. He was sentenced to life without parole. The community struggled to reconcile the man they thought they knew with the one now sitting in a cell. How could someone so respected, so intelligent, so normal, do something so monstrous? But that's the point. Monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they look like the person next door, The colleague you admire, the partner you trust, the au pair left the country. She carries the weight of survival and guilt she doesn't deserve. Christine's family keeps her memory alive, not as a victim, as a woman who tried to help someone, who saw danger and didn't look away. And that's what makes this story so devastating. She wasn't naive, she wasn't weak, she was kind. And kindness, in the hands of cruelty, became her end. If this story reached you, if it stirred something in your chest, don't let it fade when the video ends. These cases remind us that danger can hide in the everyday, that silence can cost lives, and that sometimes the smallest voice can be the one that saves someone. If you know anybody in a violent or unsafe situation, don't wait. Say something. Call for help. Speak up. Your voice might be the one thing standing between someone and a tragedy like this. Drop a comment. Share this video. Keep their names alive. And we'll be back with another story that needs to be told. This is the Exposed Crime. Stay safe out there.